Welcome back sa isa na namang episode ng Shapers and Shakers, Personalities of the EDSA Revolution, kung saan tinatalakay natin ang mga personalidad at individual na humubog at bumulabog sa bahaging ito ng ating kasaysayan. Ako si Vec Alporha.
Ako si Lee Candelaria.
Ako si Aaron Malyari.
At ako si Joselito Ebro.
And you are tuned in to Podcast, Conversations on Philippine History, Politics, and Society.
Nung nakaraang linggo, syempre pinag-usapan natin agad yung masasabing pangunahing personalidad ng EDSA People Power na walang iba kundi si Corazon Cojuangco Aquino. Syempre na-establish natin sa episode na yon yung talagang pag-angat ni Cory bilang kumbaga antithesis ni Marcos at pangunahing mukha ng anti-Marcos movement noong mga panahon na yon.
Tama. No? So, pag inaalala yung pagbagsak ni Marcos, ang karaniwang naiisip ng mga tao ay ito talagang spectacular na mapayapang pag-aalsa sa EDSA. Pero madalas, ang nakakalimutan natin ay hindi naman nangyari ang People Power Revolution sa loob lang ng ilang araw noong February 1986.
Totoo yan. At yung mas historical na pagtingin nga ay dapat iugat din natin sa maraming mga taon ng resistance at opposition mula sa maraming hanay gaya ng journalists, artists na talagang lumaban sa batas militar. Bukod dyan, di rin naman dapat nating kalimutan na may mangilan-ngilan pa ring politiko noon na nasa oposisyon na sa kabila ng pagkabilanggo ay talagang nanindigan laban sa diktatorya.
Tama kung iisipin mo, napakadali para sa kanila nung mga panahon na yon na mas piliin yung mas madali, mas mapayapang buhay. Pwede nilang piliin na magkompromiso o kahit nga talagang tumawid sa kabilang bakod. Pero hanggang sa dulo, mas pinili pa din nila na manatili sa oposisyon. Talagang hindi rin nagpatinag. Dalawa sa mga leader opposition na yan ay ang pag-uusapan natin sa ating papabalik. Sina Senator Jovito Salonga at Jose Diokno.
Okay, so malamang marami sa mga listeners natin, lalo na yung mga Gen Z, ay hindi kilala itong dalawang mamang ito, no? Or kung kilala nyo, edi good job. Pero para sa mga hindi kilala, yan mismo ang dahilan kung bakit natin ginagawa itong episode na ito. So basically, Jovito Salonga and Jose Diokno were opposition senators nung panahon ni Marcos. Mahaba yung kanilang karera. Marami silang pagkakahalintulad pero magkaiba din sila in so many ways.
So, yung unang similarity nilang dalawa ay pareho silang matalino. Like genius levels. Isang patunay dyan ay nung sabay sila nag-take ng bar exam noong 1944 at pareho silang nag-top doon with a score of 95.3%.
So, sabay silang naging abogado. Pero yung kumbaga experiences nila leading to that moment, sobrang magkaiba din. On the one hand, Jovito Salonga, born on June 22, 1920 in Pasig, was the youngest son of a pastor named Esteban Salonga and market vendor Bernardita Reyes. Sa madaling salita, hindi siya anak mayaman. So, nung bata daw siya, nagtatrabaho siya bilang shoe shine boy, saka nagbebenta ng dyaryo. Nung nagkolehiyo naman siya, nagtrabaho siya bilang proofreader sa publishing business ng kapatid niya.
On the other hand, si Jose Diokno naman masasabi na mas may kaya. He was born on February 26, 1922, so mas bata ng kaunti kay Salonga. At yung tatay niya, dating senador at Supreme Court Justice na si Ramon Diokno. Habang yung nanay niya naman ay isang American mestiza na dati ring school teacher na si Leonor Wright. So kumbaga, matagal na sa gobyerno yung pamilya nila. In fact, yung lolo ni Senator Jose Diokno ay isang veterano ng Philippine Revolution against Spain at ng Philippine-American War. At ito ay si Ananias Diokno ng Batangas.
Related din daw sila sa dating Governor General ng Pilipinas na si Felix Berenguer de Marquina. O di ba? Iba talaga yung history ni Senator Diokno. Sa kabilang banda naman, si Senator Salonga, iba yung kanyang kwento. So sa public school siya nag-aral, buong buhay niya. He first went to UP in 1936, tapos nag-decision siya na mag-pursue ng law in the same school.
Pero by December 1941, alam naman natin kung anong mangyayari. Then syempre, papasok ang mga Hapon, no? December 8, 1941. Ito yung panahon na aabot na sa Pilipinas yung ikadawang digmaang pandaigdig na. Hindi rin naman ikinagulat ng mga tao kasi nagsimula na ito sa ibang bahagi ng mundo. No? At itong si Salonga, ang talagang amazing sa kanya, totoong World War II hero siya. No? So talagang tunay palaban, no cap.
Yes, so dumating yung mga Hapon December 1941 at agad-agad nag-underground siya at sumali sa paglaban sa mga Hapon. Pangunahing ginawa niya ay pagsusulat at pagpapakalat ng counter-propaganda. I mean, kailangan nating ma-appreciate yung tapang dito ni Jovito Salonga kasi pwede talaga siyang binitay ng mga Hapon lalo na dahil dito.
True. So sa kabutihang palad, di naman siya binitay. Although, inaresto siya noong April 1942. So, kwento niya ay tinorture siya ng mga Hapon sa harap mismo ng kanyang tatay na si Esteban Salonga. So, by June of the same year, sinintensyahan siya ng 15 years na pagkakakulong sa New Bilibid Prison. Fortunately, nagpardo ng mga Hapon ng mga bilanggo the following year at napalaya siya.
Sa side naman ni Jose Diokno in 1940, he enrolled sa UST ng law after finishing his commerce degree from DLSU. According to Jose Dalisay, natapos niya daw yung commerce degree niya as a summa cum laude in 1937 and needed a special dispensation to take the boards. Kasi sobrang bata daw and ayun, of course, he topped the CPA boards with a score of 81.18%. So, naantala yung pag-aaral niya ng abogasya dahil nga sa digmaan. He spent the years of the war reading and studying. And at some point, sabi pa daw sa tatay niya, "Quiz me," ganyan. At yun na nga, nang humupa ang digmaan noong 1944, nag-bar exam siya kahit wala talaga siyang law degree.
Very interesting tong dalawang life stories na ito, no? Kasi pareho yung experience pero magkaiba yung background at parehong nag-bar noong World War II, 1944. So imagine nyo na lang, I mean marami kasi tayong friends no, na nag-bar recently. So imagine nyo kung gaano kahirap yon tapos hindi pa sila sure kung anong mangyayari sa future nila, no? Anyway, so after the war, Jovito Salonga and Jose Diokno started their law careers in different ways. Salonga, after resuming his studies sa UP and a few years of private practice, he got scholarships to study in the US at particularly sa Harvard para sa kanyang master's at sa Yale para sa kanyang doctorate. Despite offers to teach in the United States, umuwi siya ng Pilipinas where he established his own firm, where he also taught law and he wrote law books. Meanwhile, si Diokno naman, he started working with his father. Si Ramon Diokno, kilala bilang nationalist at anti-imperialist na politiko and had ruffled some feathers. He was accused of election fraud and the young Jose Diokno defended his father and won. In these years, he developed a close friendship with Manila Mayor Arsenio Lacson, and his friendship led to Diokno's head start in governance and politics, with his appointment as Justice Secretary under Diosdado Macapagal in 1961.
Meanwhile, in 1962, Salonga ran for district representative of the 2nd District of Rizal, defeating the dynasts who ran the province for decades by a wide margin. Dito makikita yung isa pang difference ni Salonga at Diokno. Salonga ran under the Partido Liberal while Diokno was a nationalista through and through. Pero ang interesting dito, despite being a nationalista, known liberal President Macapagal still appointed him as Justice Secretary. And maybe this was foretelling of the later rift between Diokno and Macapagal, when in 1962, bilang Justice Secretary ay pinaimbestigahan ni Diokno si Harry Stonehill, isang American businessman na dikit sa maraming politiko, malalaking politiko at cabinet members nung mga panahon na yon. Malaking eskandalo ito, no? At it actually ended with Diokno receiving a letter from President Macapagal accepting his resignation kahit hindi naman siya nag-resign.
So, alam na, di ba? Kala mo wrong send pero alam niya na yon nung mga panahon na to. So, meanwhile, in his first term as a congressman, Salonga was already kicking some asses, so to speak. So, he debated seasoned nationalista congressmen and eventually chaired the prestigious House Committee on Good Governance. And despite being a Liberal Party member, nanindigan din siya patungkol doon sa Stonehill scandal. So he led hearings and investigations on numerous cases of graft and corruption. And maybe one of the highlights of his career as a congressman was his role in Macapagal's initial effort to reclaim Sabah. So by 1965, tumakbo na si Salonga sa Senado at nanalo. He was the top candidate in the Senate in that election and was one of the two liberal candidates who won. Of course, we already know that this was the same year that Ferdinand Marcos became president.
Yes, dinatnan na ni Salonga si Diokno sa Senado, who ran and won for the Senate in 1963. So he was a senator from 1963 to 1969 and won again for a second term. During his stint in the Senate, talagang makikita yung nationalist conviction niya, lalo na with the economic legislation that he filed and supported. Makikita rin yung economic nationalism ni Diokno, typical of a nationalista noon, that he was very outspoken, he criticized US military bases, he criticized Marcos's decision to send Philippine forces to help United States in the Vietnam War, at iba pa. He was also known as an oppositionist, and it was no surprise that Jose Diokno was one of the first opposition leaders to be arrested when Marcos finally declared martial law in 1972.
Salonga also positioned himself as an opposition senator. He also opposed Marcos's move to send members of the Philippine Civic Action Group, or PhilCAG, in Vietnam. He exposed various corruption scandals that involved Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. He revealed shady deals between Marcos and his cronies, local and foreign, and so on. In 1971, he ran again for a second term under the Liberal Party, and in one of their campaign sorties sa Plaza Miranda, August 21, 1971, may sumabog na bomba. At may isang batang namatay habang ang LP Senate slate ay lubhang nasugatan at ang isa nga sa mga ito ay si Senator Salonga. He sustained serious injuries which permanently damaged his left eye. And he was also rendered partially deaf. In that election, nanalo pa rin bilang number 1 senator si Salonga. And then a year later, idineklara na ang batas militar.
Bago pa man magdeklara ng martial law si Marcos, kinukutuban na daw si Diokno when the writ of habeas corpus was suspended in the aftermath of the Plaza Miranda bombing. Nag-resign si Diokno sa Partido Nacionalista bilang protesta and took to the streets with the movement of concerned citizens for civil liberties. So malinaw no na bago pa ang martial law, lalabanan na talaga ni Diokno si Marcos. And as mentioned, he was among the first people to be arrested, He was taken in by the military early morning of September 23. He was taken to Camp Crame and moved to Fort Bonifacio where he joined Ninoy Aquino, Chito Santa Romana, and other anti-Marcos figures. Later on, they were moved to Laur, Nueva Ecija, where Diokno was kept in solitary confinement.
Doon siya dinadalaw ng kanyang asawa at mga anak. So, dinadalhan siya ng libro, kinukwentuhan, at sabi pa nga yung mga dinadalang libro ay in Spanish or in French para hindi masensor. At doon daw sa mga pagdalaw na yon ay sinabihan niya yung kanyang pamilya na huwag kayong iiyak. Huwag kayong iiyak lalo na sa harap ng militar. Kumbaga, he did not want them to show Marcos's military any weakness and pain. Sa kabilang banda, Senator Jovito Salonga openly and relentlessly opposed martial law. He also worked hard to defend Marcos's political prisoners from the most prominent to the most obscure ones. Salonga and his colleagues lawyered for Ninoy, and throughout martial law, he refused to compromise and refused the offer to be part of Marcos's interim batasang pambansa. In other words, he refused to give Marcos any semblance of legitimacy. So by 1975, Salonga was organizing for political detainees through paglingap ministry to political detainees.
Jose Diokno was detained for 2 years. Marcos released him in 1974. Birthday blowout daw niya. Walang kahit anong kaso ang isinampa kay Diokno. Paglabas niya ng kulungan, agad niyang binuo ang Free Legal Assistance Group or FLAG. Ang interesting sa FLAG ay kahit na nagsimula lang siya bilang grupo para bigyan ng legal assistance yung mga political detainees, nag-expand ito to fight for the rights of indigenous peoples and other sectors. Diokno also worked with other groups like task force detainees na umalalay sa mga pamilya ng mga naging biktima ng torture, forced disappearances, at extrajudicial killings. He continued to speak against the Marcoses, or Ferdinand Marcos, inside and outside the country, at the risk of being arrested again.
In 1980, 1 year before the official lifting of martial law, Jovito Salonga was facing a difficult challenge. By this time kasi, tuloy-tuloy siya sa kanyang pag-criticize kay Marcos. Tapos, in August 1980, may mga pagsabog na naganap sa Kamaynilaan at itinuro di umano si Salonga bilang isa sa mga mastermind nito. By October, pinaaresto ni Marcos si Salonga pero agad ding pinalaya because of the immense pressure and clamor from his supporters. He was then allowed to leave the country for the United States. He would not go home until 1985. By this time, lumalakas na ang oposisyon laban kay Marcos in the aftermath of Ninoy's assassination in 1983.
Since his release in 1974, Jose Diokno, meanwhile, continued working with different opposition groups and civil society organizations. He was among the prominent personalities of the multi-sectoral coalition Justice for Aquino, Justice for All, and formed Kongreso ng Mamamayang Pilipino or COMPIL. He also co-founded Kaakbay, a group which openly spoke not just against martial law, but also on broader issues such as US military bases. So lumalakas ang oposisyon, and before we know it, ayan na, 1986 na. Yung tanong ngayon, ano ang naging posisyon ni Salonga at ni Diokno sa EDSA? One interesting point, according to historian and Diokno's daughter, Dr. Maris Diokno, ay duda yung tatay niya sa EDSA People Power. In fact, he did not participate. Ang kutob daw niya, ni Jose Diokno, ay pakana ito ng militar. Siyempre, sa pamumuno ni Ramos at Enrile, in order to maneuver and put themselves in power. Meanwhile, Salonga threw his hat behind Cory Doy tandem. Sa madaling salita, aktibo si Salonga sa kampanya ni Cory at aktibo ding nakilahok sa EDSA. So both former senators were appointed in the Aquino administration. Salonga as chair of the Presidential Commission on Good Governance and Diokno as chairman of the Presidential Committee on Human Rights. Both positions were key in correcting the wrongs of the Marcos dictatorship.
Despite this, Maris Diokno would recount that her father remained wary and constantly reminded the people to keep their vigilance and to always be ready and willing to criticize the president when she's wrong. And almost prophetically, tama naman siya. The supposed peace was short-lived. Less than a year since EDSA, nangyari yung Mendiola Massacre, where government forces unleashed brute force against peaceful protesters. According pa rin kay Maris Diokno, it was the only time that she saw her father holding back tears in anguish.
Jovito Salonga, meanwhile, worked hard for the recovery of Marcos' ill-gotten wealth until he resigned to run for the Senate again in 1987. He served as a senator for the last time until 1992, when he ran for president where he tremendously lost, ranking 6th out of 7 candidates. After this, he retired from politics but continued to engage in activism.
Diokno died of lung cancer a day after his 65th birthday on February 27, 1987. Salonga, on the other hand, would live a long life and died on March 10, 2016 at the ripe age of 95. Both men did not build political dynasties, although pwedeng-pwede, no? Kayang-kaya nilang magbuo, no? But both men also left untarnished records, great legacies na magiging proud yung kanilang pamilya sa kanila. At siguro yung kahit yung karaniwang Pilipino sa dalawang abogadong ito talaga at mga statesmen hanggang sa susunod na henerasyon.
Ultimately, sa tingin ko, yung halaga ng pagtalakay sa buhay nila Senator Jovito Salonga and Jose Diokno lies in what they could represent when we think about Philippine politics. And that is, at many different points in our history, we had our own share of crooks and malignant men and women. Pero at the same time, there always were men like Salonga and Diokno, or Recto and Rafael Palma, who remained good, steadfast, and dignified. And always, they are history's reminders of what we as a people are capable of doing for our country.
At dyan na nagtatapos ang ating episode for this week. For more episodes, make sure to subscribe to podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and of course, YouTube.
Follow nyo rin kami sa aming social media pages like Facebook, nasa Instagram at Twitter din kami. Ay, X na pala yung tawag na. And soon sa TikTok. Yeah.
Hanggang sa susunod na Sabado, maraming salamat sa pakikinig and as always, have a good day.